Okay, well, thank you very much. Each of us are going to introduce ourselves. I'm going to act as the chair and try and keep us to time and then make sure there's questions from yourselves too. So if I introduce myself, I'm Ed Aspel. I'm the Executive Director of Fundraising and Marketing at Cancer Research UK. Cancer Research UK is a charity that does research into all 200 types of cancers. And I guess just to give you a kind of perspective for this evening's conversation, at some stage in our lives, 1 in 2 of us will hear the words that you have cancer. 40 years ago, 1970, about 1 in 4 of us would have survived our diagnosis. In fact, about 80% would have been dead within a year. Now, 2 in 4 survive their diagnosis. What we'd like to do is to get that towards 3 in 4, and we do that by focusing on prevention, early diagnosis, which is critical, obviously coming up with new treatments and kinder treatments. And that's our goal, but we invest heavily in research into breast cancer as well, so I guess that's why I'm here. So I'll try and answer a couple of questions too, but I have to chair. So if I hand over.
Hello everyone, my name's Emma. I'm the Clinical Director at Breast Cancer Care. Breast Cancer Care is the only charity in the UK that gives tailored information and support specifically to people with breast cancer. And the thing that we're very proud of is we combine very much clinical expertise with the patient experience. So users inform everything that we do, but we combine that with the clinical expertise. So what do? We provide information and services, practical support. We bring people together, we campaign for better standards of care. And just to give you some idea of our scale, I was looking up some of our figures for the previous year, and more than 100,000 people accessed our telephone services. So that's things like our helpline and our RSNS's email. 3 million unique users came to our website for information, and 4,000 people used our face-to-face services. And the way that we do services is very much tailoring to unique needs of people with breast cancer. And we specialise in 3 areas, one of which is moving forward after treatment's finished, because women and men have a great deal of need after their hospital treatments come to an end. And many, many physical and emotional symptoms can carry on afterwards. We also give services specifically for younger women with breast cancer, and by younger women, we define that as 45 and under, because in breast cancer terms, that's still very young. Most people who get breast cancer are older people. By older people, I'm talking about women in their 70s and 80s. That's where the majority of people get breast cancer. So as you can imagine, young women have very unique needs, particularly around having potentially life-threatening disease at a very young age, but also treatment that could impair their fertility and stop them having children, or trying to explain to young children what's happened. And the third area that we have specialist services in is something called metastatic or secondary breast cancer, and that's when breast cancer has spread from the primary site in the breast and is no longer curable. So women with secondary breast cancer will die of their disease, and unfortunately in the overstretched NHS, it's an area of care that's not well structured and well set up. So that's the other third area that we have our specialist services in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Fiona Hazel. I'm Director of Policy and Communications at Breast Cancer Now. Breast Cancer Now is the UK's largest breast cancer charity, and it basically focuses on investing in breast cancer research, medical research, to really what I think some of you might describe as cure breast cancer. I'm not sure we would actually quite describe it like that, but basically to stop women dying from breast cancer. And our vision is that we really believe that by 2050, we can actually stop women dying of breast cancer. And so we fund a whole programme of research. At the moment, we fund about £25 million worth of research up and down the country, in academic institutions, in hospitals, and we fund everything from research around prevention. We know that we can prevent a lot more cancer, and that includes breast cancer. So we fund work into prevention right through to treatment and better ways to treat and diagnose the disease, but also ways to improve living with breast cancer, so to make sure that not only that women can survive breast cancer, but actually they can lead their lives to the full, and that they can cope with the treatment when they're going through it. As part of our work, we try and make sure that the progress that we find in medical research gets translated through to the patient as quickly as possible, and that's why we campaign. Some of you might be familiar with a current campaign that we have going called Keep Kadcyla, which is a drug which is for women with secondary breast cancer, with metastatic breast cancer. And so we do a lot of campaigning work around making sure that progress that we see in the laboratory essentially reaches patients as quickly as possible for their benefit. We also work in terms of providing information, particularly around risk and prevention, but also around service improvement. And we actually collaborate with Breast Cancer Care to work with healthcare professionals and patients to enable patients to set out what standards of care they expect for their treatment, and to work with healthcare professionals in their local breast cancer units to make sure that they get the best access to the best treatment available. And that's basically what Breast Cancer Now does.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, my name's Richard Cummins. I'm a breast cancer surgeon. So when a patient goes to their GP worried about something wrong with their breast, they'll be referred under the 2-week rule to a breast clinic. And we work as a team in the breast clinic with both breast cancer surgeons, breast nurses, breast physicians. We try and achieve an early and rapid diagnosis of breast cancer. However, the vast majority of patients who come and see us do not have breast cancer. We saw 6,800 patients in one of our clinics last year, and we only diagnosed 190 breast cancers. So it's very important that we know that the vast majority of people who are referred do not have breast cancer. But if they do, we want to diagnose them quickly, very early, so the best prognosis from their disease can be achieved, and that's by early diagnosis. Without any doubt, that is the best and most important step to achieve the best chance of cure in breast cancer. We don't only just take the first steps, we work with a team of oncologists, with breast nurses, with radiologists and pathologists to try and optimize the treatment of breast cancer, which in the 20 to 30 years I've been treating breast cancer has improved dramatically. The most important improvements, I think, probably are early diagnosis, accurate diagnosis, and effective treatments. But there are more steps that we need to achieve. We need to go ongoing research into how we can achieve better outcomes, better surgery, better chemotherapy, more effective therapies. We also want to get patients to us even earlier. We have an effective breast screening service in this country, but overall in this country, from the ages of 50 to 70, women are invited every 3 years for breast screening. But in England, only 72% of those invited turn up. If we could make that 95% like it is in Sweden, we would achieve a huge improvement in the outcome of treatment of breast cancer. We still regularly see women who turn up with 4, 5, 6 centimetre cancers who've been hiding them or ignoring them for 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 6 months. There's no point in having a rapid diagnostic service of 2 weeks if the patient's been sitting at home scared for 6 months. That's defeated the whole purpose. So we must direct our efforts at getting people in early, getting them well treated, and keeping up the research so that when the patients are treated, the best drugs are available, the best surgeries available, and the best teams of experts are available to give them the best prognosis.
Thank you. And Sinead?
Hi, I'm Sinead. I'm from Copperfield. So if you haven't heard of us already, we're a breast cancer awareness charity, but we're targeted, I guess, specifically at young people. So we were established in 2009 by a lady called Chris Hallenger, and she had been diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 23. When she was diagnosed, unfortunately, she was misdiagnosed a number of times, and also because she wasn't aware that she was at an age where she could get breast cancer, she'd ignored her symptoms for quite a long time as well. So I guess both of those factors contributed to her being diagnosed very late. And when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, it was at stage 4. So that means that her cancer was metastatic, it had moved to her liver and her spine, but also that it's incurable, but treatable. So Chris has been living with cancer for the last 8 years, and she set up Copperfield 6 months after her diagnosis. I think what she recognised was a kind of a lack of education amongst young people, not just that they are, they could get breast cancer, but also, I suppose, an awareness of what's natural and normal and healthy, and some of the things that can be warning signs and that you should be aware of. So what we do, I guess, is we try to talk about breast cancer in a way that isn't going to kind of preach or frighten people. We don't think it is something you should be afraid of. We want people to feel empowered to get to know their bodies, to get to know what's normal, and to be aware of what's not. So we go into schools, workplaces, universities, and with the kind of aim of educating young people about the signs and symptoms of breast cancer. And we also, I suppose, try and adopt quite a fun and playful approach. So we've done a number of really kind of bold and fairly innovative campaigns. And we do a lot of work at festivals. I think our overall mission really is to fit into people's daily routines and kind of be this reminder when maybe they least expect it. So it might be as you're scrolling through Instagram, or it might be a text that we do, a free monthly text every month to remind you to check your boobs. So I think that's really at the heart of what we do. But following on from what you said, we don't want people to feel frightened. We want people to feel that they are informed and are able to make the best kinds of decisions about their health.
Okay.
So actually, sorry, I said I wouldn't be involved, but as Shahid just pointed out, basically this idea of fear-mongering is something that's quite important and something that's very much part of the discussion about the politics of breast cancer. So we were meant to have Mr. Thomas Simmons, MP, come and speak, but there's a Brexit vote today, so literally all the MPs in the country are unavailable. So instead, I'm just going to show an extremely short clip. It's under 2 minutes, and it's basically about the Peace Ribbon movement in the US. So obviously I'm not pretending that it's the same thing as the UK, but it's quite an interesting clip to put kind of a political backdrop to the discussion. So without further ado, I'll just screen that really quickly. Cue or...
Spectacle. It's all spectacle. You have a big spectacle, it draws people's awareness to whatever you're making spectacular. And so this is one of the biggest spectacles of all in America, and so it's a perfect platform for awareness for something. The whole month is just gets worse every year. In fact, the patients are noticing that it's worse every year. I used to joke with the patients that fear of breast cancer was a cottage industry in this country, but the fact of the matter, it's not a cottage industry, it's a big business. The commercialization of fear. I mean, it's just the media just sensationalizes everything about breast cancer way over the top. And, what is their problem? Why don't they talk about pancreatic cancer? That's almost uniformly fatal. And lung cancer, that kills millions of women. The patients are noticing that it's worse every year. I'd say the majority of them who come to the office do not like Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I've noticed myself that this year is worse than all the previous. They have breast cancer. They don't want to be a part of a marketing spectacle. They want to be someone who is either living with the disease or lived with it and is cured, and they don't want to be beat over the head with it every October. There should be Cancer Education Month where people go on Good Morning America and actually educate people instead of just scaring the bejesus out of them. To me, this is appalling. It's an appalling use of an emotional situation that millions of women are going through in this country this whole month. I can't stand it.
Right, okay. Somebody who really wasn't terribly in favour of awareness, perhaps, breast cancer. Anyway, there's 5 questions that I've been asked for us to run through, but I will try and leave some time at the end for you to ask any other questions. But the first one on here, and we will talk a bit about marketing as well, but first question is the breast cancer world overcrowded, was the first question. So who would like to fire away first at that one?
I'll go first, shall I? Do I think it's overcrowded? I don't think it's overcrowded. I mean, I think there's been a huge amount of progress in breast cancer. So as we were talking about just a moment ago, sort of your chances of surviving breast cancer are higher than ever before. And that's obviously vital and great and really important, but there's a huge amount more to do. In terms of, I think we were talking about the early detection and prevention space, getting the message out there around early detection and how important it is, but also not just detection, but actually how you can reduce your risk of breast cancer. There's a big agenda there that I don't think we've cracked. And we've got a lot more to do in the treatment of primary breast cancer, but in particular metastatic breast cancer. And I think that takes an awful lot of effort, it takes an awful lot of money, and I think that whilst that needs to be well directed in order to make the most impact, I don't think it's overcrowded. And I think one of the sort of challenges, but also the opportunities with any kind of fundraising and raising money and sort of charity work is that it's up to the people affected how they want to show their support. So here at Cambridge, you know, you work as a union to support breast cancer work, whether that's in research or whether that's in care and support. And I think it's really important that those affected by breast cancer are able to choose how they do that. If you want that to be the case, then I think it's also you can't define who does and doesn't get involved, and therefore you will have lots of people involved in trying to stop breast cancer. And I think that's really, really important. So I don't think it's overcrowded. I think we've got a lot more to do, actually. And the question for me is, how do we make the most of the crowd to basically stop breast cancer and to make sure that women can live well?
Anybody else want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I guess it probably won't be surprising to say that I agree. I don't think that it is overcrowded. I guess for me, I mean, thinking about the people that we have in the room today, each of these charities kind of fulfills a different role, but it's all cogs in one machine that's trying to give people the best possible outcomes or the best treatment, the best care whilst they're going through cancer. So I know that, you know, someone close to me was diagnosed and they benefited from early detection. They also benefited from brilliant research and treatment that was, you know, born of great research, and also amazing care from breast cancer care. So I don't think that, you know, we're all trying to solve exactly the same problems. I think what needs to happen is for people in the breast cancer arena to be working really collaboratively, because I think that's when you can really kind of see the best results. Yeah.
I think England and the United Kingdom has a problem in that they only spend 9% of their GDP on healthcare. The Americans spend 29% of their GDP on healthcare. So we have a relatively small healthcare budget, and it needs expansion, but the government probably can't afford to expand it in every field. If we got to the point of spending what the Americans spend on healthcare, we'd have to give up half the army, 3/4 of social care, and all the other problems the United Kingdom has. So we've got to get money and activity from somewhere else. And to treat healthcare and breast cancer is my specialty well, we need the help of charities. We need the help of money, we need the help of advice, we need the CRC to be doing the research. So no, it's never undercrowded. What we need is more people doing more research, putting more money into it. I have a vested interest. I have a vested interest in getting the patients well. And the best way to do that, I'm afraid, is to put money and effort into it. And unless we do, we'll fall well behind the gold standards that are being set over elsewhere in Europe and in America. So we need your help.
I mean, it certainly depends how we're defining overcrowded, but I agree with all the other panellists. I think certainly from the charity world, I mean, as I said, Breast Cancer Care is the only tailored charity for information and support for breast cancer that doesn't do pan-cancer. So there's only one charity like that. So it's very much far from overcrowded. And sadly, we only reach a small proportion of everyone diagnosed with breast cancer. The hardest thing I hear is, I wish I'd heard about you sooner. So we know the message is still much more to be done, but also even with awareness, with all the brilliant work of the combined charities and the pan-cancer charities, awareness of symptoms is still low, awareness of age of risk is still low. There's lots of surveys around people misunderstanding about their age of risk, misunderstanding what constitutes symptoms. And it's important because a symptom we all know about, such as a lump, everyone knows about a breast lump being a symptom of breast cancer, but there's strong evidence that if you're diagnosed at a later stage, you're more likely to have a non-lump symptom because people don't recognise the other symptoms of breast cancer. So I think in a world where We still need far more information and support. We still need improved awareness. We could do so much more for early diagnosis. And as the other speaker said around funding, not just research, but also treatment and care, we need much more. So it's a long way from overcrowded.
And yeah, I guess I would add to that. From a marketing perspective, fundraising perspective, I suppose you could sometimes say, would there be economies of scale or efficiencies if you put certain charities together? But I doubt very much whether if we put it together, we would raise as much as we do by being separate and appealing to a wider audience. And I also am not surprised that there's quite a few charities that will focus on breast cancer. It is the most common cancer out there. So 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer. 1 in 870 men will get breast cancer. It's not just exclusive to women. The good news is 78% of women survive their diagnosis. But what's important to driving that is the fact that they have early diagnosis and that there is awareness. The other thing, of course, is when you get good news like 78% survive, it says survival sounds great, but actually there's a lot of living with cancer after you've become what's called a survivor. And actually the effects of the treatment, the fact that it could come back. So breast cancer care is just as important as more and more people are not just surviving as well as going through those issues. The other thing I would say is that when you invest in breast cancer research, there are benefits for other cancers as well. So we spend a large amount of money on breast cancer, but we also spend the largest amount on what we call fundamental research, which is understanding what cancer is itself, how it works, how you could stop it. And that gives benefits for all different types of cancers. And so it would be wrong to just say that by focusing on breast cancer, there aren't benefits for other types as well. So I think given the scale, given the fact that the number of women and some men who get this awful disease, but the fact that many survive, having care as well as research is absolutely critical. And I doubt very much if we amalgamated it whether we would raise more money. I'm pretty sure we'd raise less. That would be my view.
Ed, could I just come in there? I mean, Breast Cancer Now, for those of you that don't know, actually is the result of a merger of 2 smaller medical research breast cancer charities. And that came about because actually we did feel that we could achieve more together. But I think that in the charity market, probably there's a bit of an assumption that each of the charities don't really talk to each other. Actually, I think probably we all fund work together. So, you know, we certainly fund work with Cancer Research UK, we work with CARE, we work with clinicians and so on. And I think there's an awful lot of collaboration across the charity sector that possibly goes unnoticed. And sometimes we're probably not very good at shouting about it because it's behind the scenes. But I think the charity sector in cancer particularly has had a huge role to play in the progress that has been made over the last 2 decades. And that is as a result of a lot of people in the market, if you like. And I think that is as a result of how common the disease is and how it really affects families. So I think that it might look overcrowded at times, but actually I think it's been vital in driving progress that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay, so the second question here then, which I guess may be related, was why do the panel think breast cancer is so marketable?
Well, I think what you said, that it affects so many women. And so, I mean, my experience certainly from going out to festivals and talking to people is that everyone you speak to either has a story. So perhaps they were diagnosed themselves, or their mum was, or their sister. And so I think people can relate to it. It's a horrible disease, and I think people feel that it's not so far removed. I think the word marketable, I guess, also implies something different, and I know that there has sort of been concern around breast cancer perhaps being like more of a sexy cancer and easier to talk about, but I don't necessarily share that opinion, and I actually think the more that we can talk about it, the better. It's really about making clear when we're talking about breast cancer what it is we're trying to do. So I know there was a brilliant campaign that's had a lot of attention recently, the Know Your Lemons campaign, and it was at an illustration, and one of the reasons it has sort of come, it's been going around for years, I think, but actually one of the reasons it's got lots of attention is that it was one woman who had breast cancer, and it was her response to this Facebook campaign of sharing a heart on your kind of news feed to show that you were supporting breast cancer awareness. And I think for us, it's really important that when you're shouting about it and when you're kind of marketing breast cancer, as it were, that we're not just kind of doing these really fluffy terms and just putting a heart up to raise awareness. We're actually thinking about how can we either, support people and give them the care that they need, or how can we educate them and empower them to make the right decisions about their health. And so we sort of need to be using that sphere a bit more responsibly.
I think it's partly the numbers, as you said. It's the most common cancer in the UK. So, as we've heard, so many people know people. It affects men and women. Although it's much less common in people of your age, it affects all ages. It's treated with a sort of whole gamut of cancer treatments, with surgery. There's breast cancer genetics and inherited breast cancer, although that's only a very small minority, but with radiotherapy, chemotherapy, targeted therapies. So it's got a broad range of treatment, and so many people in the country know someone who's had breast cancer. So I think it's the numbers, but also it's a very outwardly visual sign, so there's a huge impact on body image, and I think sometimes, probably wrongly so, cancers that are a little bit more hidden to the eye maybe don't always get the same attention. There was a great American journalist who died of breast cancer about 10 years ago, but she said, my breast is that part of my body where eroticism and maternalism merge into one. So it's such a poignant symbol of both sexual health, but also femininity and maternalism and breastfeeding. So I think all of those things together have perhaps been what's made it so marketable. But it's also actually a credit to people themselves. A lot of the really big news stories around breast cancer have been generated by patients. Years ago, when a newer drug called Herceptin, it's not new anymore, first sort of came to light, women marched on Parliament to get access to that drug. So it's a very vocal, very well organised body of people as well.
Yes, I think I've noticed over my years of practice is that liberation of the woman has gone with publicity of the problems. And that's been a great thing, because over the last 20 to 30 years, we've introduced breast screening, we've got actively into publicising disease, and that is very different to what our grandparents talked about. They literally hid the fact that they had a problem, and that hiding was a detriment to everybody's outcomes, and being liberation of women so they can talk about the problem has made it much, much easier to communicate information, to get people to be aware of the problems, and to come forward and to the doctors early so we can treat the disease better. And that's been a general slow progress over about 30 years. The average size of a breast cancer in 1960 was 3.5 centimetres. The average size of first presentation of a breast cancer today is 1.4 centimetres. So just by getting good publicity, just people discussing the subject, we are getting the tumours earlier, we're treating them more effectively. And that's been a great thing for our ability to, I use the word cure, to get as great a rate of cure as we can. And that's why it's important that we have this knowledge, this outward view on ill health.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same. Having worked for a breast cancer charity for a few decades, I can remember a time where it was not talked about openly. And actually, my mother's mother died of breast cancer. She was an Irish farmer, and she died with a larger than the breast cancer that Richard talks about when she was 50. And she finally went to the doctors about it, and she died 3 weeks later. And she left, very, 4 or 5 very young children behind her because of the fear of talking about it and the taboo that went with that, largely because it was about her breasts, not just cancer. So there is something intrinsic about breast cancer because it, as Emma says, it combines the sort of sexual with the maternal to some degree. But I think the other thing, which is absolutely core to why I don't think breast cancer is marketable. I think the desire to beat it, to solve it, to treat it better, to support it, there is a real demand for. And if we go back to the dictionary definition of what is marketable, then I think it's about what is in demand. So, or what is there a demand for? And I think there absolutely is, and that is because of the numbers, but also the very visceral impact that it has. But I think that the other thing that is really important here is that it affects women who have been the communicators, the carers in society, and certainly 20 years ago when it was more taboo, the liberation of women's health has, breast cancer has played, I think, a huge role in, and it has gone side by side in terms of women's liberation, I guess. Yeah. But that is a hugely positive thing. And I think we all have a responsibility as individuals and organisations to make sure that it is marketed in the right way for the greater good, if you like. But ultimately, the fact that it is something that people really care about because they're hugely touched by it and it hugely affects their lives is both, sort of the tragedy, but also the sort of opportunity, really, because it affects so many that we actually can create momentum behind it. Emma talked about the Herceptin campaign, actually, and that was, chaining yourself to the railings. And actually on, the latest challenge around access to drugs, and in particular breast cancer drugs, where the system really seems to be unable to approve the latest drugs which have come out of medical research and get them into the NHS, women are not far off chaining themselves to the railings again, because many of these women and many of you have helped to fund this medical progress, and now they can't get it on the NHS, and these drugs will keep women alive for decades sometimes. So, it's interesting what comes around, but I don't think that's about it being marketable. I think it's just about the impact that this disease has on society and our society.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add to that, because it's even in my job title, but I don't like this idea of breast cancer being something that's marketable. People who support and fundraise for research into cancer and breast cancer do so because they don't want somebody else to go through what they or one of their loved ones has been through. And so they're not giving money to fundraising and marketing, they're giving money to research and to care and to the cause. And they're actually giving it for somebody else is what they're doing. So I think the marketing idea is really crap, actually, as a way of expressing it. But at the same time, I think that part of the reason it's also breast cancer gets quite high profile, apart from the fact that it's the number one cancer, is I think actually so much progress has been made as well. So where we are now, the message actually, I think, can be, to a lot of people, quite hopeful. So I really take exception to the video we saw before, which talks about fear, fear, fear. We talked earlier about 78% of people who are diagnosed with breast cancer will survive. That's because the real message that needs to get out there is about prevention and about early diagnosis and making sure you present yourself when you have a symptom. And that's actually good news. And so we can actually make huge progress by actually making people aware of that. And I think that's, if you want a term for marketing, that's what we should be marketing rather than saying something about either fear or the fact that we're seeing people as consumers of something. That's not what this is about.
I was going to say on the fear point, I actually, I agree with what you're saying, Ed, and I think that particular American clip is an interesting one. And I think America is different and it does work differently. But certainly based on the latest research we've done, and I think you can see it if you look at it over the decades, the fear of breast cancer has come down remarkably, not surprisingly, as progress has come about. And that's largely as a result of, various different, the NHS, charities working together. If anything, actually, there is a complacency around breast cancer to some degree in terms of risk and in terms of detection and actually getting the right messages to the right groups of women so that women understand their risk at the right point and can do something about it is incredibly important. And I think that therein lies the challenge. And so whilst we will always want to reduce fear, we do want women to absolutely understand what is the reality and what they can do about it. And just, if I may, just on the point around the comparison with other cancers, I find it shocking, actually, because the idea that any woman who has breast cancer would wish to have that cancer compared to something like pancreatic cancer is horrific. The idea of polarising or putting cancer patients against each other or cancers against each other is is unhelpful, and I think it's actually really offensive to anybody who's had a cancer diagnosis. Breast cancer obviously has had a huge amount of progress over the years, and that's great, but it is not a done disease. There is a lot more that needs to be done, and that is not to say that there isn't more to be done in other diseases, but actually breast cancer has also helped to lead the way in terms of progress into research, for example. So actually there's a lot of commonality between breast cancer and ovarian cancer, and actually what some research which has gone into breast cancer in terms of new drugs has ended up not benefiting breast cancer patients directly, but actually has gone on to benefit ovarian patients, and that's really, really important, and that's how cancer research works to a large degree. But I take real, I sort of strongly sort of challenge this idea that breast cancer is a good disease to get versus pancreatic, for example. I think that's terrible.
So Richard, did you want to?
In a way, we're missing our politician here. He's not here, but the politicians have a bit to answer for, because we tend to find our politicians react to immediate crises and make decisions based on crises. And what we should be doing is giving good leads for the future planning of the best management of the money in breast cancer research, and not marketing this drug this week because it's the flavour of the week, and then the politicians have to have a crisis meeting to fund it. So we need to give the politicians guidance of a long-term plan of where the money that we raise and the money we have is best spent. And the politicians shouldn't really have a 3-year plan. They should have a 30-year plan. And that's where we should all be going. And it's your future as people involved in our community will be to make sure the politicians make good long-term decisions about how we use our resources, and not short-term crisis decisions, which tends to be all you hear in the newspaper is why we can't fund capecitabine or Herceptin or one of the drugs. That's not the way to do it.
Okay.
I just had one more thing to add. I guess on the, I agree with what's been said really about the marketability, and I think it is a kind of dangerous term to throw around when you're talking about breast cancer. I guess one of the issues that the video raised is around Breast Cancer Awareness Month in particular, and I know, so I didn't introduce myself properly before, but I work in marketing for Copperfield. So maybe I'm challenging my idea anyway. But I guess we often are approached by businesses who want to do stuff with Copperfield, and we really have to decide whether their interests are, I guess, in the right place. And I think there is a huge commercial interest in Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I've certainly experienced that from brands wanting to work with Copperfield. And for us, obviously, we sit slightly differently to some of the other charities in that our number one objective is about awareness and education. So what we really try and do is when we're working with commercial partners, we think about ways that we can actually get our information out there. So it's not just, making something pink, but and hoping that in itself raises awareness. It will be doing things like we work with shower gel brands to get information on the back of their packaging. We recently did something with a coconut yogurt company, and all of our signs and symptoms are on their packaging. So I think it would be wrong to deny that there isn't this kind of commercial interest in the breast cancer sector, and I think most of the time it's really well placed, and it's businesses wanting to do really good things to kind of support this movement. But I do think that charities have a responsibility to think carefully about who they're partnering up with, and how they can use those opportunities to really kind of affect behavioural change as well as just kind of more broader kind of awareness.
Okay.
There was an awful campaign in the States, which might be why some of the bad feeling comes about 3 years ago, when Kentucky Fried Chicken produced for Breast Cancer Awareness Month buckets of pink chicken. I don't mean undercooked. And but the awful thing about that was, apart from the product and the way they ran the campaign, is not one penny went to any breast cancer charity or research or support. So they were completely unscrupulously just riding on the back of the pink fog. And that's, I think, the sort of thing that gets a really bad name, was marketability, which is about helping people understand where they can get information and support, where they can contribute to research if they want to do that. It was only about, I think it was around about 1960s, there was a woman who ran a support group, and her brother was a journalist on the New York Times, so she asked her brother to advertise the support group, And the New York Times wouldn't do it because just that recently they refused to publish either the word breast or cancer in the New York Times. So in terms of marketability, helping people talk about cancer, and we know that some of the cancers, particularly bowel cancer, a lot of the campaigns very much herald breast cancer awareness work for making it much easier and much less taboo to talk about cancer.
Okay, thank you. Third question then, and it kind of follows on, is this marketability for breast cancer dangerous? Does it shift resources away from other cancer types?
Well, I think as we've heard, there isn't enough money in breast cancer, and I don't see it dangerous. As we've heard as well, a lot of other cancers benefit from money spent on research, from advancements in treatment and care and information, certainly from awareness campaigns. For example, many of you will know about the Movember campaign about growing the moustache in November. That raises huge amounts of money for prostate and testicular cancer. So other charities and other awareness campaigns have benefited from the success in breast cancer. But I also think it's so important for targeting specific groups. As I said earlier, breast cancer is more common in older people, and yet we know that older people often have poor awareness of symptoms. People who from socially deprived backgrounds do worse with their breast cancer outcomes. So there's a lot more to be done, and I think in that sense it can't really be considered dangerous because there's so much more in all the areas we've been talking about. Plus we know that has benefits across the board for other cancers too.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing that is dangerous is, the KFC example you used is a brilliant one. I think campaigns like that can be really damaging because, for obvious reasons, because it undermines the really hard work that lots of charities and organisations are doing to make sure people are informed, and to do kind of really hard work to make sure that people have the best possible outcomes. I think in terms of shifting the focus away from other cancers, as has been raised, I don't think it's about one or the other, and I think actually looking at it in that way is fundamentally quite wrong. And I also think there's a lot that I guess can benefit from one another. So Movember was mentioned. We've done quite a lot of work with them on campus. So actually thinking about, are there opportunities where we're trying to spread a similar message and we're actually talking about a kind of more holistic approach to being well and reducing your cancer risk. And all of those things I think can be done together, and we should make the most of those opportunities. So I don't think it's about pitting one against the other. I think that that's really wrong.
I'd just like to, we know the breast screening program works. And I'd just like to emphasize, if you all go home and tell your grandmothers to make sure they have their breast screening, you get that message out, and we get people doing the things that we know work. We can not waste our money on things that are on the sidelines. We concentrate our money wisely. We get people to get into the breast screening program. We try and make it ethnically more acceptable. London, only 62% of the people who attend the breast screening program. The vast majority of those people are probably from diverse ethnic groups, probably people who haven't got good communication skills, who haven't got access to publicity. So if we can target those people, that in itself would be a major contribution to the early diagnosis of breast cancer. We know it works, we should target it.
Do you feel, though, that, you see lots of different types of cancer, so do you feel that breast cancer does distract from others?
I don't really. I think talking about cancer in general is good if you do it sensibly and you don't put fear in it. I have a personal experience of an aunt who won't go for breast screening because she fears what she will find. And that's the wrong way of looking at it. We should be publicising it as a positive thing. You have your breast screening, you attend your GP if you have symptoms. It's a positive thing because you're going to get it early and you're going to cure it. And if that message gets out there, people will be less fearful, because the fear is the worst thing about any mention of cancer. So we take that away. We show this is a success story. Go out there, do the right things, take the preventive actions, do your screening, and you'll be well.
just a slightly different perspective, I guess, is that so breast cancer, because there's been a lot of progress in it over the last couple of decades, actually what it means is that in terms of some of the advances which are now coming through from medical research, certainly you're able to now actually apply that and look to other diseases outside of cancer. So to give an example, and it's a shame Nick's not here actually this evening, so he's led the off-patent drugs bill debate in the Commons, and that's about getting really cheap drugs which have already exist for one particular clinical setting and showing that they work in another. Now, we have worked with Nick and with people like Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's research, but also sort of arthritis research. So working with other diseases to create a coalition around trying to shine a light on this particular issue around off-patent drugs and the benefits that getting these drugs prescribed by GPs and into the healthcare system so that they can help to prevent other diseases, including breast cancer, is something that I guess the support that breast cancer gets has allowed us to do as a coalition, which without it just would not happen. So it's not only just about, I guess, breast cancer and other cancers, but it's actually about what breast cancer can do to help other diseases where the same thing will happen but further down the line because the progress is not as advanced. And I think there's a really important opportunity there which we must seize and working with people like Nick. But also it will work back the other way and does work back the other way. But I think that is one of the benefits of having a high-profile cause like breast cancer. And our challenge is how we actually deliver that benefit through into patients over the next few years, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, cancer research, we fund research into all what we call 200 types of cancer. We call 200 types because cancer is a disease of the cell, and so for every different type of cell, there's a different type of cancer, but actually there's as many cancers as there are individuals because it will be unique to you. The way we fund research doesn't go along the lines of, right, this is breast cancer and how much money it needs, here's children's types of cancers. All we actually do is we fund what we think is the best research that's out there. So scientists, researchers will come to us with proposals, and if we think they're good enough, and they're likely, or we think they're likely to get a good result, that's what we fund. And I think what's really important is this link between understanding one type of cancer and the benefit it can have to others. And actually goes beyond just cancers. So we've just been part of a group that set up the Francis Crick Institute in London, which is a new centre which is looking at not just cancer, but diseases of the cell, like Alzheimer's and heart disease. And what you find is that by putting scientists of different disciplines together, actually they get serendipitous discoveries because they inform each other's work. And that's really about understanding fundamental biology and how it might work. So I think it's misplaced to say that if you're putting research into one type of cancer, it's going to distract from others. There are other types of cancers as well that are, you could argue, are underfunded. And that's very often due to the lack of progress. So, for example, pancreas cancer is a very, very stubborn cancer. Very, very difficult to have made progress in terms of finding cures. And that's as much because there are very few research proposals that come up that are really great, because this is a disease that's so hard to detect at an early stage. But perhaps if we can understand the learnings we're getting from breast cancer, which might look into how we can do genetic work, how we can look into preventative work, then maybe that can help pancreas cancer too. So I think it's a wrong idea to think that actually it's just going into one type of cancer. Okay, so this one might, well, we'll probably agree, I'm sure, but anyway, this one says, should we be investing in care or in research? So, go on.
Well, it's not an either or. Both areas are so hugely important. Research is very much about the future in a way. So when we research, for example, new drugs, that can be years worth of research, or it can be a long time before first concept development till routine use in certainly NHS care. So research has its place, care has its place, and for me it would never ever be an either or. I think Fiona gave a lovely example earlier where we collaborate. I remember a few years ago, a research group based in Cardiff did some research on men with breast cancer. We've heard very few men get breast cancer, but there was no information for men. So men were being given information that women got. So they were reading about things like underwear and covering eyelash loss through chemotherapy, through makeup. So it was demeaning. And Breakthrough Breast Cancer at the time funded that research. And we took the results of that at Breast Cancer Care and published the first ever information booklet specifically for men with breast cancer. So research can often inform care, certainly inform patient information needs. But breast cancer care, we very much take the approach that what we're doing is for today, because when people are diagnosed today, they need care, they need information, they need support, they need to be able to speak to other women, they need to have their questions answered in whatever way suits them. But they also want to believe that they're benefiting from best research, so that the treatment they get is the very best it can be. So I can't ever make it an either or. I think both areas are crucially important to people diagnosed with breast cancer and other cancers too.
Yeah, I mean,
Go on.
sorry.
No.
No, sorry.
Far away, stop.
Wrong way.
Okay. Yes, I agree with what's just been said, and I guess to add to that, I think what struck me about that question was that awareness wasn't mentioned at all. So Copperfield, we're an awareness and education charity. We don't do care or research. That's not to say that one is better than the other. I think that they all kind of contribute. But for Copperfield, I guess one of the stranger parts of our manifesto is that we operate with the aspiration that at some point we won't need to exist. So we hope that one day there will be a wholly effective cure for cancer, and that Copperfield won't have a reason to be around. But at the moment, what we know is that early detection is probably the most important factor in terms of impacting your chance of survival. And so with that in mind, I think actually it is really important that we are investing in programs that help to educate people and make them more aware. And I think not just money, but because I mean, evidently research costs a lot more than some of the programs that we run. But for us, it's about thinking about how we can work with primary care practitioners, so GPs and sexual health services, and also to work with MPs to make sure that cancer education gets on the curriculum. So I guess investing time in that respect. So we run a campaign called Rethink Cancer, and the objective of that campaign is to get cancer education on the curriculum so that young people are being taught about not just the things that they should be aware of to look out for, but also some of the lifestyle factors and choices that they can be making at a really early age to reduce their risk. So I think there's a lot more than just care and research, and I think that education can play and does play a really important role, and we should be investing in that too.
Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't put it better myself, really. Research and care, actually, I think if you ask the public, they would say they're both equally important, and why wouldn't you? Because you can see the benefits of both, and you need both. And actually, as breast cancer moves further towards being sort of what would be described as a long-term manageable condition, it's not there yet, but where actually you don't die from it, then clearly care is going to become even more important so that you can live and live well. I think, though, that the research and care kind of question is very oversimplified, because I think there is a bit in the middle which is almost like the D in the R&D. You can do all the research in cancer or breast cancer, and you can have the best ability to do care, but if you can't get the progress into the system so that patients get what they need, then it doesn't matter how much you do of either. Well, it does, but there's a massive blockage there, and I guess a kind of a key ask of all of you is that you help get that message out there, because by whether it's raising awareness about the signs and symptoms, advocating to your parents about the importance of screening, or campaigning to your local MP, if Nick was here, about access to drugs or access to the latest standards of treatment and care, to make sure that there is that translation from research into care, And those three things together are equally important. But I think sometimes we forget the bit in the middle.
And we can't sabotage the two in a way, because I think it was a great example earlier when you said about realising that screening can find cancer sooner, but people don't go. The two are so inextricably linked in a way, because there's no point in making advancements in knowledge if they then don't play out in practice because the care isn't set up. And a great example is around when people living with advanced disease, that we understand far more about pain and symptom management, but we also know that many people with advanced cancers get no access to palliative or supportive care, or that it comes far too late. So rather than much earlier on, perhaps within 2 weeks of dying, which is way too late to get appropriate symptom control. So the two are so linked, because it's crazy for us to research into better pain management, but then not have the care set up or the information or the infrastructure to ensure patients benefit from that in a prompt way.
I think we're in Cambridge, and Cambridge is where they first described the structure of DNA.
Yes.
And that fundamental understanding of the intrinsic cell function has been intrinsic to our development of fantastic new drugs, immunotherapies. 40% of my patients who are given one drug have no detectable cancer after that drug. And that's the future, and that future is only going to be developed by good research. And if we can develop immunological therapies with a total understanding of where cancer cells are misbehaving at a molecular level, we will be able to cure cancer. So I'm incredibly optimistic. The progress that we have made in the last 20 years is unbelievable. And to see patients come in with a huge breast cancer, 6 weeks later, you can't feel it. It's that good. And if we can continue that research, continue the development of those fantastically effective drugs, and understand the basic causes of cancer so we can treat them appropriately, I think that's the future for good care. We can treat metastatic disease, we can treat everything if we get the research right. So I'm a great believer in core research, and it's not just breast cancer, it's all cancer. And I would put my money on long-term development of good research in institutions like Cambridge University, exactly what I would support, because I think that's the way to cure cancer.
Right, okay. You'd probably expect me to have said that, I think.
I know. I'm supporting your job.
You are. You're doing a very good job, thank you. The only thing I would say, yes, that's our goal, that we want to beat cancer. I think beat is often a better word than cure, because it will often be manageable rather than a cure. But it's still going to take quite a lot of time. We've got an ambitious goal that 3 in 4 people will survive cancer. It's 1 in 2 at the moment, 3 in 4. By 2034, which still means a quarter won't. So care is not going to go away. And just surviving cancer doesn't mean that care isn't going to need to be there. So Harpal Kumar, who is our chief executive, was responsible for helping pull together or chairing the government's strategy on cancer. And we call for care to be a core part of that, because until this disease is totally manageable, which is a long, long way off, then care is really, really crucial. It would be cruel not to have it. I don't need to say any more than that. But if we move then on to the 5th and last question, then I'll kind of open it up. But why is awareness raising so important amongst young people? So I'll let you start that one.
Sure. So I guess one of the things that we really want to challenge is the idea that breast cancer is an older person's disease. And I think a lot of people, well, hopefully less now, but a lot of people tend to think of it as something that maybe happens to their mum or their grandma. And also, I suppose, people think of it as just something that happens to women and not men. So we're really keen to make sure that it is something that's kind of on the radar of young people. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So although breast cancer does affect older women more often than it does younger women, it is still the most common type of cancer for women under the age of 40, and it is happening to young women a lot. So we have over 100 Bubettes who are ambassadors for Copperfield, and they are women who've been diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 35. And they go out into schools and workplaces and anywhere that will have them, really, to talk about their stories and their diagnosis and why, I guess, being aware that breast cancer happens to young people is so important, and more importantly, to make sure that people are educated about the signs and the symptoms, and to give them the confidence, I suppose, to go and see their doctor if they notice a change that is unusual. And then I guess the other, kind of in answer to that question, the other thing is really thinking about from a behavioural change perspective. So for us, that's at the core of what we do, really, is trying to start this kind of healthy habit that you will take with you for the rest of your life. And we know that you're much more likely to form a habit from a young age. So if you think about some of the things that you do every day, like brushing your teeth, you've been doing those since childhood. And we really want to make sure that as you're developing, and that's why we're so keen on getting into schools, that you're developing these habits that are going to set you up to have the kind of best possible chance of detecting breast cancers at their earliest stage. So I think it's very important, and that's why.
Okay, who would like to?
My experience is we are seeing more and more younger women with breast cancer. There's no doubt the average age of breast cancer in the 1970s was 63. It's now dropped down to 58. There's this tendency of younger patients presenting. And there's a number of etiological factors which are quite complex. It's our lifestyle. We are more hormonal. The girls get their periods earlier. They have a lot more hormonal exposure of the breast, and therefore the breast is more at risk than it was because of our health. We get healthier, but this is a disease linked to being healthy. And it's unfortunate the healthier you get, the more likely you are to get breast cancer at a younger age. Your weight's very important. So obesity is a risk factor. Alcohol consumption, the number of children you have are all risk factors. We have less children than we used to, and that in itself is a risk factor. So our lifestyles promote the young age of breast cancer. That doesn't mean you have to completely change your lifestyle, but there are like you were saying, you have to be very aware of what you do, your weight, your exercise levels, your dietary habits are important in this disease. The next step is, if you find a lump, you need to get to somebody who knows what they're talking about. So we need to educate the patient, but we also need to educate the GPs. There's no point in having a 2-week wait for an appointment when the patient has waited 3 months to see the GP, and the GP sends them away 3 times because, oh, you're too young to have breast cancer, so don't worry about it. No, that's not the way to do it. If anybody has a breast lump that doesn't go away after 4 to 6 weeks, they need to have an expert opinion to make sure it's nothing to worry about. That's a fact. That's what should happen. And anybody where that's not happening, you have a failure of the system. So we have to make sure the system works. It should. Once you're seen, the vast majority of people do not have breast cancer at a young age. Very important to remember, most breast lumps in young women are not breast cancer, but never ignore a breast lump.
Okay.
I think awareness in young women is very important too, but I think so across the board. We've heard a lot this evening about how crucial it is. We know that the sooner breast cancer is detected, the earlier it's found in that person, the far more likely treatment will be successful and outcomes will be good. And certainly at Breast Cancer Care, we see examples from all ages where breast awareness has gone wrong. So, for example, younger women, as we've heard, perhaps not really being aware that they're at risk because they may think they're too young. Even their GPs may be telling them wrongly that even a suspicious symptom, you're too young to have breast cancer. Of around 55,000 people diagnosed, about 5.5 of that 55,000 will be in women under 45. So the majority of breast cancers are still in older women. But we also know there's a lot of ignorance that older women don't perceive as they get older, their risk grows. Or when routine invitations for screening stop, they perceive that because they're not being invited, they must no longer be at risk. And that's completely and utterly wrong. So I think across all generations, the important thing is understanding what you should be reporting, not being afraid to report that symptom. And as we've heard, once you have that symptom, getting prompt and accurate play through the system and appropriate diagnosis. But where I think it's really sad is not so much based on age, where people have real misperceptions about risk, whether it be related to age or to the symptoms that they have. Incidence been growing year on year on year. It's likely to go up at least another 2% over the next 10 or 15 years. So lifestyle, of course, is really important too, but incidence of breast cancer is going up and up. We're not going to change that in any remarkable way, but what we can change is how soon we find that breast cancer and therefore make it more curable. And of course, incidence in younger women is going up, but incidence across the board is going up. And it isn't actually any greater in younger women, it's because incidence in all ages is rising year upon year upon year.
I think I would bring it back to, I was thinking about our vision, which by 2050 we hope that no woman who is diagnosed dies. And, in 2050, you guys will be in your sort of 50s, I guess, maybe. Is that a scary thought? It's a scary thought for me, and it's a little closer to hand. But I guess, so, you are the generation who will benefit from the, decades of progress, or hopefully will. But actually, I think, we are going to be in a very different world come 2050. We have a really challenged NHS already. We talked earlier about there's not enough money going into breast cancer. So as well as it being really critical that you understand the signs and symptoms of breast cancer and you feel confident and enabled to detect it at the earliest opportunity, you actually, I think, I think you need to be much more aware of the risks, because actually I think the system is going to be looking to you to manage your risk of cancer generally. And actually, it'll be interesting to see how our health system is working over the next 25 years. But I think if you lead a healthier lifestyle, then I think you will be afforded probably different kind of treatment. And that's a real kind of look into the future. But I think that if you do things to manage your risk, so if you exercise regularly, if you don't drink alcohol or drink very little alcohol, and if you eat a sort of a healthy, balanced diet, then obviously your chances of getting cancer, including breast cancer, will be less. That does not mean to say that you won't get it, because there are other factors involved. And one of those is having children, and, it's hard enough to decide when to have children, let alone to decide it based on your breast cancer risk. And the idea that you would do that alone, I think, is sort of probably not possible. But I think it's important for you as a generation to understand that you are sort of the generation that can really do something about your lifetime risk of breast cancer and other cancers too. And whether you choose to do that or not is obviously up to you. But a lot of the knowledge that we know and the progress that we've made in terms of the prevention of cancer, we now can do much more about. So I think, why is it important that young people, there's awareness of breast cancer? I guess on top of awareness of signs and symptoms and being educated about that, it's actually important so that you can make your own choices about how you want to lead your life, and what that might do in terms of helping to reduce your risk of breast cancer and other diseases, because a lot of the things you can do to reduce your risk of breast cancer will reduce your risk of other diseases too.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess what would I add to that? So if there's awareness amongst young people, what I guess we would really be saying is, I think there's three things we would push for you to be aware of. The first one would be about preventing it developing in the first place. So something like 25% of breast cancers could be prevented through lifestyle change. And that is predominantly about alcohol, about obesity, and about exercise. The problem is you won't know if it's necessarily you, because you could have genetic symptoms, but 25% could. Actually, 40% of cancers could be prevented. So a lot of people would think this, well, smoking is the kind of the obvious one, but if you looked at obesity, all the elements that go into that, obesity as a link towards cancer is almost as big as smoking. So obesity is the next smoking. So it can have a dramatic effect on breast cancer, but actually across a lot of cancer. It could reduce your risk of developing, or we could reduce 40% of all cancers by changing lifestyle, which is not easy to do. But as you said, if you can get the habits in at a young age, I think that's the really key thing. The second thing I would say is, what you've heard a lot is around early diagnosis. So it is about knowing your body, but breast cancer, but also a lot of other cancers, if you present earlier, what we call stage 1, and it varies according to the cancer, but you have a significantly high chance of survival than if you leave it late and, say, present at A&E. It has a dramatic effect on survival chances. So making sure that you present, I think, is really important. But the main message I would say about presentation is, yes, breast cancer occurs amongst young people, but it is still far more prevalent at older age groups. So I would ask you to go and actually talk to your older relatives, friends, about risk and making sure that they either take up the screening program and go, or if they've got symptoms, they go, because it is more likely that they may have it than you do. But also make people just be aware too that there are some women who are more susceptible to breast cancer than others, often if it runs in the family, and get to understand that background, perhaps speak to your doctor if you think there's a chance that you may be more susceptible. Because some women who are very susceptible for genetic reasons, the screening would be extended to them, but actually most of the advice is keep the screening to 50 plus, because actually that's where the real benefit lies. So that's why. So prevention, early diagnosis, and get the word out there to your older friends and family.
Ed, could I make one more comment? Most of the work that we do as charities would not be done if it wasn't for people like you and your family and friends. So the research that Breast Cancer Now funds up and down the country, the work that Cancer Research UK fund, the work that CARE funds, and the work that Copperfield fund, that work has all helped to make significant progress in breast cancer, which without it would just not have happened. The government wouldn't fund it. It is down to the generosity and the creative fundraising talents that I know that you exhibit well that has made sure that has happened. So I guess the only other ask I would say is that is really, really important, and please continue it. It is kind of continue to hold the baton for the next generation that come after you, because we will only beat cancer, including breast cancer, if that continues. And that big cultural change that's happened in changing breast cancer from a taboo subject to something that people can talk about and feel comfortable talking about, and have a bit of a sense of humour over, which is really important in terms of detection and making it feel something that you can talk about in everyday conversation. We really look to you as the kind of next generation to take that on.
Yeah, I'd echo that, actually. I think that's really important. We don't get government funding for the research and the care, developing the care we do. So it's really important. I mean, cancer is the UK's biggest killer. I talked about 1 in 2 of us will hear the words. It's the world's biggest killer. It's bigger than HIV, it's bigger than malaria, it's bigger than war as well. And yet, as you've said, we are close to developing real treatments that can make massive breakthroughs. So it may well be the case that somebody who's already alive, who's been born, who may grow up not to fear cancer in their lifetime. But until that happens, we still need care, we still need your support. But if you get behind it, you could be part of ending what has been the world's biggest killer and has been around since the dinosaurs, which I think is quite impressive idea, actually. Anyway, enough of that. I'm going to ask if there's anybody in the audience who wants to ask us questions. I've got a microphone here, I think that there's any...
Hi, I was just wondering, you were saying that the number of children that you have or when you have those children actually affects your risk. I was just wondering, in what sense?
Now I will give you the kind of generic answer, and somebody might give you a more scientific answer, but the more children you have earlier, then it contributes to lowering your risk of breast cancer. And obviously these days women tend to have children later. They used to call breast cancer, I think, a long time ago, they used to call it nun's disease for obvious reason. But yeah, it's not necessarily a modifiable factor. It's, obviously it's something to be aware of, but it's very difficult to make a decision around when to have children just based on your breast cancer risk, I think.
Richard?
Yes, we've changed the way we behave. In 1900, the average female had her first pregnancy at 16, had 7 pregnancies by the time she was 25, with probably about 3 live surviving children at 1 year. Today, the average female in the whole of UK has, dare I say it, 1.8 pregnancies, not literally a 0.8 pregnancy, but has that by the age of 30. So we've totally changed the exposure of the breast to hormones in those formative breast years, which are the dividing cell years between the ages of puberty and 30. And that change in our behavior has made the breast cells behave differently. So we have to understand the hormonal environment for the breast affects your chance of getting breast cancer. I'm not suggesting you all go back to having 7 pregnancies by the time you're 25, because the survival rate of the parents, or the mothers, was very low as well. But we are living different lifestyles. We're healthier, the girls start having their periods earlier, women take HRT, they have hormones for longer. All those factors are understood to be causing the cells to divide and more likely to produce breast cancer. So we have to understand that so we can treat it appropriately. However, we all make lifestyle choices, and those choices are very much up to you to see what the benefits are against the risks. And we now know that you will live longer today than you ever would have lived. So not having children doesn't shorten your life, as many children doesn't shorten your life, but it does increase your risk of breast cancer.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, one at the back there.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. One question I have is that as kind of more strain gets put on the health services and it's sort of harder to get GP appointments and things, I think GPs don't always deal very well with people coming in and being paranoid about a lump. Like I've got friends who've been, and the GPs sort of treated their concern with quite a lot of, they've just been quite disparaging, and then people feel sort of embarrassed that they took it to the doctor, and I think that can be quite damaging. And how do you think we can combat that in the future?
Yeah, that's a huge problem for us in the breast cancer world. As I've said before, there's no point in getting an appointment in 2 weeks for your appointment if you've waited 6 weeks to see your GP. It rather defeats the whole purpose. However, the structure of the NHS is such that we behave in a very different way than the rest of the world. For example, if you live in America, you don't have a GP, you're directly referred to a breast physician, so you take out that step. The idea of general practice is to filter the referrals so that you get more accurate referral, but there's evidence today that that's not happening. The GPs are so overwhelmed that any girl who goes in with a breast symptom gets referred. So we have to rethink the way we structure the use of the resources. And you're absolutely correct that delay at general practice level, or more than the delay, but the fact that they're not accurately picking out the risk groups and reassuring the non-risk groups, is a major factor of education for our young doctors. And I think that's one of the aspects that I think is very important we address in the next few years, because we have got limited resources, we've got to spend them wisely.
To add to that as well, if there's time, I think it's something that we have confronted quite a lot in our work, because we don't want to just be, telling people go to the doctors and sort of frightening them into action. And also, it's really important. So we have a medical advisory group who we work with to make sure that actually we're working together to ensure that we're getting the best possible outcome. So I think one of the really key things is making sure that people are aware of what is natural changes as well. So, for example, it can be perfectly natural to have lumpy boobs if that's what's normal for you. It might be that your boobs are really sore around your period, or you kind of feel different. And so, for us, what's really important is that if you are touching your boobs and looking at them regularly, or your pecs, if that's what you have, then you will get to know how they feel normally. And then if you spot changes, it should give you more confidence when you go and see a doctor who might be dismissive, to say, actually, I check my boobs every month and this isn't a normal lump, or this isn't normal dimpling. I really want you to refer me, and have less people, I guess, going unnecessarily and being frightened.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I think we probably all hear stories all the time of probably younger women going to see their GPs and being turned away. And you know, the message that we give, and I don't think the message should change, is that if you feel that there's something unusual for you and it's not right, you must persist, because what else can you do? And I think that message is really, really important. So I think we have to continue to give women confidence to do that, whilst at the same time trying to make sure that we really explain the signs and symptoms well, but also give a sense of the risk that different age women are at. But I think there is a system challenge, and you know, there's some interesting work going on in other diseases where technology is really assisting in this area. So, you know, using sort of digital and video to actually sort of put clinicians and patients together quicker and more effectively. And there are different systems around the world that we should be looking to, because inevitably, if we want earlier diagnosis, and therefore we raise awareness, we are going to increase the pool of women that are looking for the signs and symptoms of breast cancer. So for me, the answer is don't stop with the going to your GP. It's really, really important. And you know, I think certainly as a charity, we would say is if you're not happy with the decision, unfortunately, you need to go back and you need to persist. And you know, it's tough for GPs because they are trying to do, you know, a million different things. But I think if you know, there's lots of good information out there about what the signs and symptoms are. And if you look at that and you are convinced that you have something that is not right and your GP won't listen, then you need to go and ask for a second opinion, whilst the system catches up with this, if you like, and we find new ways to sort of increase getting the right women through for treatment. There's also some great research going on which in 5 or 10 years' time will really help in this area, but we're just not there yet, and which will help with the sort of stratification of women and getting the right women into GP surgeries and into the screening programme and so on. But yeah, the message is very much don't give up.
Okay, I think we've got was there a question over here too? So I'll come back to you. I think there was a question over here.
I just wanted to ask, you spoke a lot about precautions that young people can take to reduce their chances in the future of developing breast cancer or other cancers. What are the kind of things that we should be looking to do and to change about our lifestyle?
So as I understood it, for her question, so what are the kinds of things that we can do to reduce our chances of developing breast cancer? Unfortunately, my knowledge here, probably don't drink anything. I mean, there's no safe amount of drinking alcohol, unfortunately. So cutting down on alcohol is a sensible thing to do. Obviously, having a healthy weight would have an impact on that, and also doing regular exercise as well. So it's probably what you would expect to hear. Those are things that you could, and actually it won't be just about breast cancer, that would help for other cancers too. But those are the key things as far as I'm aware, but you may want to add to that.
No, absolutely. And I think, as we were saying earlier, getting into the habit and forming habits around those kind of risk factors now is the key, really. And it's just making sort of small baby steps. I did dry January, and I was pretty grumpy, I have to say. But you know, there's lots of great technology out there to help. You know, we've all got running apps or exercise apps which really help you to sort of to keep moving. But I think there are apps out there to just monitor your alcohol consumption. So you know, there are lots of things you can do. I think, you know, the other thing is that risk in different age groups sort of changes. So I think if you're kind of talking to your mums about their risk, actually, you know, about managing your sort of weight postmenopausally, so being active, taking regular exercise, and making sure and sort of managing your weight if you're sort of your mum's sort of postmenopause is, you know, really, really important. And obviously for your mums also, particularly, it's about making sure they go for their screening when invited. They understand the risks and benefits of screening, but they take up that and go along with that so that they can sort of understand their risk, if you like. So it's kind of different messages for different groups. For you guys, it's absolutely about early detection and managing your risks now by doing some small things with your lifestyle. And for your parents, it's more about getting them to do different things and also going for screening.
So I'm conscious it's nearly 6 o'clock, so I do want to come back to your... Yes.
The doctor had mentioned that in the US you can go straight to a breast doctor, but you can't. you have to have a referral from your PCP, which is your primary care physician, and that's if you have insurance.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important that we realize that there isn't universal health care in the US and that you don't get to go. And if you do go directly, you're paying for it out of pocket. So that's all I wanted to say, is that that's misleading in saying you can go directly there.
The interesting thing here is that Bupa now has direct access referral. So if you're insured in this country, you can go directly to a breast physician or breast surgeon without going to your GP. And that's based on the evidence from the American system. And if you look at European examples, the comparative utilization of investigations, England spends about 8% of its investigation on mammograms and that, whereas Sweden spends 20%. So they spend twice as much providing mammograms and ultrasounds. So a lot of different countries have different systems that are more successful in getting the patients into the system earlier. Not just America, but parts of the American system are very effective, parts are very bad. But this country is falling behind on its rapidity of getting the diagnosis at the moment. We have a particular problem with at the moment, which we should need to address. So that's why the politician who's not here needs to address how we get better access and quicker. Yeah, no, I agree. No, did not.
Okay. Conscious it's 6 o'clock. Any other final questions? Okay, well, let's call it a day then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.